that something happened a long time ago that forced the ancient Egyptians and many other people to live underground and live in mountains and caves for, who knows how long, hundreds, thousands of years. So what you have to understand is that, the people who we talk about today as far as ancient Kemet, when we talk about Hatshepsut and we talk about the pharaohs, we talk about Akhenaten and King Tut and, all of the pharaohs or the Nisut that we talk about in ancient Kemet that we know about, the bodies we have today. What you have to understand is none of these pharaohs, none of these people were there. None of them was around when the Sphinx or Haru M. Akhet, as it's known as, none of these people were around when the Sphinx was built. So when we start looking at ancient Egyptian history, we look at the dynasties, we look at the Nisut or the pharaohs, and we think, many people think that everything that is Kemet is attributed to these people. But you have to realize that the Sphinx or Haru Emakhet, we're going to call it Sphinx for short because that's what everybody know it as, is dated about, over 34,000 years old. It's dated to. It's many people who look to the water erosion that's on the Sphinx and say, well, wait a minute, we know this happened, over 6,000 years ago, the flood. There's no way the Sphinx was built after that time. It wouldn't have that kind of water erosion in the desert. So then we still look at the accounts of it and we can date it back further than that. So they don't really have a date for the Sphinx. They just know it's over 34,000 years old. And when you look at the Great Pyramid itself as well, it is also older than what they tell us. It is much older and predates these dynasties, meaning, again, none of these pharaohs who we're talking about, none of these Nisut, none of these people, Akhenaten, none of them was around when the Great Pyramid was built. And this is going to make a lot of sense as we go along. And you have to understand that because a lot of people are getting confused. And there are little things that if you don't get, it's going to just throw you completely off in your research. So you need to understand. So again, as I talked about before in the Saturn and Satan series about the pyramids, there are pyramids all over the world. Pyramids found everywhere. Not to mention the fact that they can't date some of these pyramids. Some of them they don't even talk about. They don't really want to put a date on them. The ones that they do, goes back to before these Egyptian pharaohs or Nisut that we know about, that we talk about. Not to mention the fact that there are pyramids that we can't get to and some that we can't even really examine. We have ones in China that the Chinese won't let too many people even in there. Then you have that huge pyramid-shaped mountain in Tibet that's supposed to be like the biggest pyramid in the world. It's huge. They won't let anybody in there. It's illegal for you to even climb that mountain. And the people who have tried to climb it reported that they were feeling sick or dizzy. Some people recorded time lapses where they lost time. Some people reported rapid aging. So they don't even go to that mountain and touch it. We don't even know what's there or what that is really about because anybody who tried to document it was either arrested or couldn't make the trip because they were sick or something happened to them. So we have accounts all over the world of pyramids everywhere. Pyramids in the Grand Canyon, as I'm going to show you in the Saturn and Satan series. The artifacts they found there. There are pyramids all over, America. We know about the ones down in Mexico. And everywhere you look, when you start to look at the Becker-Hagen's grid, and you look at the intersecting points on that grid, we know that the map is scrap that we have today that we look at for us, the Earth. For you flat earthers, we know that map is not completely accurate, but a lot of people do go by the Becker-Hagen's grid because you can actually detect the energy coming from those intersecting points. And we know at almost every single one of those intersecting points that we have been able to explore, you'll either find ancient ruins, you'll find pyramids, like the Great Pyramids in Giza, which is under one of those intersecting points, or you'll find monuments at each one. Just about every single one of these intersecting points, of energy. So again, when you go back and you start looking at all this and putting everything together, we can see at some point, as I said, the world, everyone was obviously living in the ancient Egyptian culture, whatever it was before the dynasties. I'm talking about pre-dynastic time. There's very little information that we have that's pre-dynastic that we can look to as being 100% clear. So we don't know. I mean, most of the stuff is mythology that you get into when we go back that far. So we don't know exactly what was going on during that time and what was the customs and how were they living. But, you know, everything seems to go back there. And when we start getting into this stuff in this video, you're going to understand why. It's going to make a lot of sense. It's these Egyptians, the ones that we know about, the ones they've been digging up, are not the same Egyptians who built the pyramids. They are not the same Egyptians who built the Sphinx. So what was these Egyptians doing? They were trying to go back. They were trying to remember who they was and understand how to get that power again. So the whole mystery and secret of ancient Egypt, when you go and you start digging into it, when you start reading all the books and looking at what they taught, they were trying to recreate what the previous civilizations have done. So when we look at the bent pyramid of Sneferu or the step pyramid of Zoser, you know, when we start looking at these things, when we start looking at the pyramid of Unis and Teti and Pepi, we have to realize that these pyramids, you know, the pyramid of Neterket, who is Zoser and everything, the step pyramid that people think is so old and everything, these pyramids were done. They were built after the Great Pyramid. They were built after the Sphinx. So a lot of people come into Kemet and they think that this is the progression of pyramids. No. And I said this before. No, it's not the progression of pyramids that you see there. It is them trying to remember how to build the pyramids. The powers that be understand exactly what happened and what's going on, and they're using our ancestors' knowledge, the information that they wanted the world to really understand and to know. They're using that, you know, to basically control everything. And you got to understand that this information was supposed to be shared. Everybody was supposed to know what was going on and to act accordingly, to live by a universal law that they call Ma'at. Ma'at is such a beautiful thing to live by. We based all of our societies around the world off the principles of Ma'at, off of just truth, you know, righteousness, justice. You know, don't do something to a person that you don't want done to you or done to, you know, your family members or something like that. We live by that. I mean, just think about that. Everything that we do on this planet, if we did it according to Ma'at, according to just what you want for yourself as a person, then this world would be, you know, a great place. And that's what it's really about when you think about the whole, you know, parables that the ancient Egyptians was trying to teach about rising above your animal nature. And people really don't understand what we mean, you know, what they meant by animal nature. And it's sometimes there are things that cause you to do bad stuff. We call them demons. It's like when you know you have a drinking problem, but you go out and get a drink, you can't put down that bottom. It's an energy that comes over you, and people call it a spirit. That's why, you know, wine and spirits. It's an energy that comes over you that we call bad, or you can just call it the wrong decision, the wrong choice. That is a energy that at one moment you are good and you are doing things according to, you know, your reality, but you teeter on something bad and you understand that it's bad. And even though you still move towards it, knowing it's the wrong thing to do, people don't really get those little cartoons when you had a angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. I mean, this is like real stuff. I mean, you look over, it's a, you know, you got an angel and it's trying to persuade you to do the right thing. But then you also look over and you got this devil over here and it's like, you know, it's your energy trying to convince you to do something that you shouldn't do. That is the animal nature, the lower self that you are subjected to, that the ancient Egyptians understood, and they tried hard as they could to get the people to understand. Rise above your animal nature and do what's right. The person that reveals himself or herself right as they're doing something evil is not truly them. I mean, as I said before, think about what it takes for you to pull out a gun and point it to someone's head and pull the trigger, knowing what's going to happen, knowing the carnage that's going to take place when you blow a person's brains out. It's unbelievable for a person to do that. But when you understand what was created, the evil that had to be created for a person to do that, this is everything the ancient Egyptians understood and didn't want the people to succumb to. And when you look at our reality today, I mean, their worst nightmares have been realized in our society and the black community itself. And it's ironic that, our enemies, the powers that be, has used the knowledge of that against us, we are basically those Egyptians. We don't know what we did, but that energy is us. We are the ancients. And this is what I want you to understand. And they understood this. So what we're going to really get into in this part 2 of the Preparing for the Medu Neter is understanding this stuff, understanding, the gods, understanding why they worship beings a certain way, the principles, the creation story, the whole waters of Noon. We're going to get into all that in this DVD, in this video, so you can understand this and really start understanding what they were going to be teaching, or what the Medu Neter is trying to get into, because it goes so much deeper onto such a level that it's going to be really hard to comprehend. So now, as I was saying, we know the ancient Egyptians were not the ones to build the Great Pyramids. They were trying to recreate them and remember, what they did. They tried to bring back the power source that was basically helping them survive and helping them live longer, helping them basically prosper as far as agriculture, and keeping the civilization going. So, one of the things that really help us understand that they were trying to remember this, and that it wasn't these ancient Egyptians, is Akhenaten. When we look at Akhenaten, and remember that Akhenaten is credited as being the first monotheist. And Akhenaten looked around and he's seen, once he became Pharaoh, or the Nisut, he's seen that, everybody was worshiping so many gods. And the gods, they looked at them in principles of nature, as far as nature, the sun and everything like that. So Akhenaten looks at nature and says to himself, basically, well, there is a oneness to nature. Everything comes out of one. You have a mother and a father, but really you are created inside of one, your mother, and you come out of one. Your mother births you, she creates you, within. And especially since the ancient Egyptians understood that, woman could create life without a male, then they really looked at, everything as one. So no matter what, you're coming out of the oneness of something. So, while everybody was worshiping so many gods, Akhenaten say, you know what? There is one God. It's one God. There isn't a whole bunch of, deities out there, and if there is, they had to come from somewhere. So there is one. So Akhenaten basically gave us the solar disk, or Aten. Now with Aten, the solar disk, we all looked around, ancient Egyptian artifacts. We've seen this stuff everywhere, and you always seen that solar disk. That is Aten. And Akhenaten, which is, he changed his name from Amenhotep IV, which would have been, to Akhenaten, to basically cultivate himself to assume the oneness of that God. So he basically outlawed all the other gods and told everybody, hey, he basically pissed Kemet off and said, he shut down the temples, stopped the worship of all the other gods. And, we got Aten, and they worship Aten, as the one universal God. So now we're talking about the 18th dynasty, the 14th century BCE. So the thing I want you to understand, when we're talking about 1353 to like 1336, I think it was, that Akhenaten reigned. So what you have to understand is 18th dynasty is relatively close to the creation of the Bible and everything like that, the creation of the Torah, or what have you, Greek mythology and everything like that. So if in the 18th dynasty, if in the 14th century BCE, they were just then coming into the speculation or the understanding that there could possibly be one God, that alone tells us that there's no way the dynasties before them, any of the dynasties, could have built the Great Pyramids, because there is perfection within the pyramids. I mean, as close to perfection as you can get. The pyramids are not just, the pyramids. They didn't just serve a function. I mean, they put in it everything. I mean, I can go on for days of what they did, what they put into it. So basically, all of the knowledge that the ancient Egyptians wrote about, that they're talking about, and that we think is possible, the ancient Egyptians, the ones before the dynasties who actually built the pyramids, actually built proof that this knowledge exists when they built the Great Pyramid. And that is, attributed to the fact that it's perfect. It's almost perfect to true north. The fact that when you measure the circumference and you add it together, basically when you draw a circle around the base and you add the points, the sides together, it equals the speed of light. Stuff like this. I mean, they put into it so much math, geometry, and we're going to get into some of that a little bit in this video. And they put into it the proof, so that if you ever thought that this stuff was just talk, if you really understood what they put into the pyramids when they built it, then you know that these people they accomplished it. Not just for the simple fact that they cut those big stones and everything is set perfectly and everything like that. The sheer weight of it is impossible. It's mind-boggling when you think how they did this stuff. Not only is that crazy and does that prove that these people were powerful, but the deeper meaning is the math, the geometry, which it shuts everything down. Now, we know when Akhenaten died, when Tutankhamun took over King Tut, his son. When they took over the throne, they basically coerced him to basically reopen the temples, to bring back the worship of all the gods. And, this pleased Kemet. It pleased a lot of people to bring back this worship. So it was really important to people who understood why all the gods should be worshipped and why they must be understood and known, because a lot of people thought Akhenaten just lost his damn mind because some of the people seen let's just say the math, the science, and the worship of these other deities. And you'll understand this as we go along, why they should be worshipped and at least known and understood, because it wasn't just like you was worshiping these beings as being actual beings who existed. There's a deeper meaning behind them. So people who are, let's just say like the secret societies, or the people who was basically, behind the scenes of the Nisut, who was making sure that everything was ran right, they knew the true meaning of these deities. And you would think Akhenaten would know as well, but he wanted this one God, and he wasn't wrong in what he was saying. He just shouldn't outlaw the worship of all the other gods, because they are as important as well. So we know Tut assumed the throne and they reopened the temples or what have you. But I want you guys to really understand who these gods are that we talk about. So I'm going to go through almost all the gods of ancient Kemet. I'm pretty sure you guys don't know them all. I'm going to go through most of them, and the really important ones, I'm going to leave some out just for time's sake, because there's a lot of them. But I want you guys to really listen and understand who these guys are, the attributes of these gods, these Egyptian gods, because it's going to help us as we go along, not just in this series, but when we start to get into the Medu Neter itself, so you can understand why, the things that they ascribe gods to and why, because it's deeper, especially when we get into the creation story. Oh man, it's going to get crazy with that. And you'll see what I'm talking about. So let's get right into it. Now, some of these guys that I name, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on them, and others I'm just going to go by for time's sake. But we really want to get into most of them in an entire series because they are important. And you're going to start to see some of the things that I talked about in previous videos. You're going to understand why. It's going to make a lot of sense. So now, Amon is the king of the gods. He's the god of wind. Usually you see him with the ram's head or the head of a man. And we know Amon combined with Ra gives us Amon Ra. Next, we have Anubis, who is the god of the dead, the god of embalming, funerals, mourning ceremonies. He has the jackal head. We all know this. A lot of people don't know that Anubis is also the son of Osiris and Nephthys. He is the brother of Horus. We have Aten, who is the sun disk I just talked about. He is an aspect of the god Ra. Well, depending on, it's another thing you got to understand, depending on what part of Egypt or Kemet that you are in, there are different stories about these mythological gods, different stories. We're going to get into that a little bit here. You got to understand, if you go to Memphis, you had the Memphite text or the whole Shabaka stone we're going to get into. You got to understand, it's different stories depending on where you at in Kemet or depending on who you talk to or what have you. We're going to get into that a little bit. Oh, yeah. Another thing about Set. I wrote this down. Set is supposed to have killed Osiris out of jealousy. He is half man and half something else. He's a hybrid. Nobody knows what Seth is mixed with. And a lot of people who looked at the depictions, they don't have a clue what it's mixed with. So that's one of those things that's out there. I wanted you guys to understand that. Some people will tell you straight up, Seth is mixed with like a dragon or mixed with something like that. Because of the depiction of Set being basically Satan, a lot of people will just say, well, he's probably mixed with a dragon or what have you, because they usually depict him as like a man with wings or what have you when you see drawings. But when you look at the ancient Egyptian depictions of Seth, they can't tell you exactly what he's mixed with, except for the fact that he's mixed. Knowing what was the parable behind these guys, why was they created, why are these aspects important, and where do they fit? That is the key to all this. Energy had to have always been there, just like, existence has always been here. So the ancient Egyptians looked at it, well, energy must have always been here along with existence. The thing was, consciousness wasn't aware of itself and it wasn't aware of the energy. And when it became aware of itself and became aware of energy, it made the first move. It made its first move, and then the next move after that took energy, and so on and so forth. And everything that came into existence after that requires energy. So no way around that. It's inescapable. Everything requires energy. So energy must have always been, just like existence. So we can say that the universe is infinite and that energy is infinite as well. And nothing can come into existence without energy. It can't happen. So when we look at the quantum physics, we look at the ultra small in quantum physics. And if we go to, string theory, strings to quarks, to protons and neutrons, to eventually atoms, this is a steady flow of energy that we get to reach the atom. And, when you look at the ancient Egyptian creation story, they called it the water waves of noon, and everything came into existence from that. So we're talking about the steady flow, the wave of atoms, steady flow of energy leading to the creation of the atom or atum. And, the ancient Egyptian creation story. So we know in the story you had Shu and Tefnut and Geb and Nut. And remember in the story you had that Shu and Tefnut got lost, and Atum sent the eye out and brought them back. They came back with the eye of Atum, or the eye of Ra, and he brought them back, and he was so happy that he wept, and it was the tears, the water, that brought about life on earth. And this is basically the same thing when we look at the creation story of us, how life came out of the waters, the primordial soup or whatever you want to call it. And it's the same thing. You can bounce it off back and forth, and it's trying to tell you something in this story, and there's a lot more to it when you look deeply into it. When we go to the Mystery Schools DVD, what did we talk about in there? We basically validated everything, and we seen the conclusion that they came up with, basically saying that it's math that it's the language, it governs the universe, mathematics. So when we look, we remember from the ancient Egyptian creation story, what did they put in place to govern everything? Ma'at. And basically, math comes from ma'at. And it's a lot of people that will tell you the same thing. It's the universal law. It's math, ma'at, that governs everything. There's no way around it. It don't matter. We always say with the law, if it don't add up, you're guilty. It has to add up. We always use mathematical terms when we're talking about truth and justice and righteousness. It has to add up. It has to make sense. Now, remember in part 5, we talked about DNA and us having this animal DNA. So now we know that the ancient Egyptians obviously understood this. This is why we see so much animal stuff everywhere. The whole animal heads and everything people always talk about, and thinking that we worship animals and all that. We see the depiction. So when you look at the depiction of Khnum fashioning man on a potter's wheel, it's representing the fact that, they understood, of course, that we come from women, that women give birth to human beings. So seeing Khnum fashion man on a potter's wheel is saying that, our bodies is a creation. Our bodies was created. Our souls is put into the creation by Khnum. So Khnum puts the Ka into our bodies, our soul. So the reason why they have Khnum there with the ram's head is because in the ancient Egyptian language, soul and ram actually sounds the same. And we always see that depiction with Khnum fashioning a man, and you always look over and you see Haket there too. And Haket is basically creating the body of man inside the womb of the woman, the egg or what have you. And we know she is depicted as a frog. And as we also talked about in part 5, is how our insides, our muscular and skeletal systems resemble frogs. So this is why they use Haket and used her as a frog and gave her that attribute and described that to her, because it's talking about our insides, and we see it resembles frogs. Now, we also talked about how we share genes with cows. And remember, Haru, when he was born in the manger, Haru was there, or Hathor was there, symbolizing the surrogate mother. And this is all metaphorically speaking and trying to tell you that we have this DNA. And, you would think, how can a cow be a surrogate mother to, something that's supposed to be like a human being? And, this is why it's just symbolic that we share these same genes. And this is what it's talking about. We know that they stole that with Christianity, with Jesus in the manger and everything like that. We see the cow always there. Now, it's one thing to see the cow there once. If you see it there once, it's like, okay. But most of the depictions that we see, we always usually see this cow. So we know this is where they're stealing it from. They're taking it from, the creation story of Haru. And you can look at a lot of different pictures of the whole, Jesus in the manger, and you'll see that cow there. And it's just clearly plagiarism. And we see, that they taking it from the ancient Egyptian creation story of Haru. But, when you look at many of the depictions of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, you always see animals in some kind of zoomorphic form and some kind of animalistic nature, something taking place that's dealing with animals, because they understood the connection that we have and that we share these genes and DNA. So, when you go back to Ethiopia, we know about things, we know about Nut, and we know about the whole ancient Egyptian creation story. We know what hieroglyphics look like. You would expect to only find these things in, maybe Nubia, but in Egypt as well. You don't expect to find them as far south as Ethiopia. And of course, we do. When you go to Tia in Ethiopia, they find Nut. You find in Nubia the 6,000, 7,000 year old carvings and writings, hieroglyphic looking depictions from these cultures. So it's obvious, as we always say when people talking about Kemet, that Kemet came up through the Nile Valley civilizations, and ultimately landed in Kemet. The thing is, but you can be skeptical about the translation and everything the Europeans have to say about the decipherment of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, but then you have to still really ask yourself and look at the African scholars and Black scholars who have also followed Medu Neter and have studied Medu Neter and have said that it has been deciphered, you have to ask yourself, do you then trust them to have did their own research at some point to figure out what they are reading is true? Is the hieroglyphics deciphered? Do we know what it's talking about, what it's referring to, and what have you? So this is something you have to ask yourself and figure out, can you accept the Europeans' documents and what they're saying as far as the translation? And, can you accept the fact that, there have been African scholars who have did their own work and trust that they have done their own research and understand that the fact that they are following certain documents is because they have done their own research. So now when you start digging into this whole thing about the Rosetta Stone, you'll find out that the Rosetta Stone was found in the Nile Delta in a city called Rajid in Arabic, or Rossetti or Rosetta in French. It was found by one of Napoleon's soldiers. It was getting ready to be used in a rebuilding of Fort Julian, which was built and controlled by the Ottoman Empire until Napoleon came and took it over. So, it's a good thing they figured out it was something worth saving because it was getting ready to be used for scraps. But the Rosetta Stone basically, it contains the three texts. We know the top text, ancient Egyptian, the middle text is Demotic, the bottom is ancient Greek. I know you guys know this stuff already, but I want to get into it for people who don't know about the Rosetta Stone, because there's a lot to it, a lot more to it, that I have to explain. But, it has these three sets of texts, and this is the issue. You have, as I said, you have the ancient Egyptian. It's not complete, by the way. The stone should be a lot bigger than what it is. It's broken, obviously. It's chipped in places. But the top text is ancient Egyptian, the middle is Demotic, and the bottom is ancient Greek. And, the whole part about deciphering it was first trying to understand that all three sets of texts say the exact same thing. Now, Champollion is given the credit for deciphering the Rosetta Stone, but it's a lot of people who worked on it before he came along and basically, finished the thing off. The Rosetta Stone is basically talking about Ptolemy the Fourth is talking about Ptolemy the Fifth and how he should be celebrated for his work and stuff like that. This is what the stone is talking about. Now, the whole issue is, of course, as I said, is trying to figure out, was the Greek talking about the same thing as the Demotic and the ancient Egyptian? And once they figured out it's talking about the same thing, now the whole problem was deciphering it, like figuring out how to match up the words, the corresponding words from Greek, which they already knew, the ancient Greek, the Demotic, which they was having trouble with, and of course, the ancient Egyptian, which they claim they had no clue how to decipher it. So Champollion basically deciphered the name Ptolemy from the Demotic text, and he did so using the Egyptian cartouche. And he determined that the phonetic properties of the Demotic text corresponds with the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So Demotic text is basically like the common language in Kemet. It's like a common language, according to Herodotus, who basically gave it that name. So you have Demotic, and before Demotic, you had the hieratic hieroglyphics. And a hieratic is basically like the priestly text of priestly writings. It was what they used when they had to write a whole lot. So basically, if you had to write a 2-page letter, if you use hieroglyphics only, then it would take a long time, because hieroglyphics is basically really detailed. You got to draw stuff out. So hieratic was basically developed alongside of hieroglyphics, in case you had to write stuff like really, really long and put in document form. So this is what the priests used. They used a reed brush when they wrote in hieratic. It's that writing tool you see Thoth always had, a little pen he has when he writes. So you have the Demotic, you have the hieratic, and then you have cursive hieroglyphics. And cursive hieroglyphics is basically like what they used when they had to write like books or religious documents. And it's when you had to do like a huge, large work. But it had to basically be in hieroglyphic form almost. So it's like a dumbed down version of hieroglyphics. When you look at it, you can see it's not as detailed as hieroglyphics. but they used it, when they had to write books and things like that. That had to be in the papyrus of Anu is written in cursive hieroglyphics, so to speak. So, you have the Demotic, you have the hieratic, you have cursive hieroglyphics, and then you get to regular hieroglyphics, and then you can go further than that. Actually, you got regular hieroglyphics. You can get into the New Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and Old Kingdom hieroglyphics because they did things a little bit, different each time. So when you start getting into the writings of the ancient Egyptians, you start getting into the language and everything like that, it goes back. It's a lot that you have to deal with, that you can't just, look at a Rosetta Stone and decipher. We're talking about thousands of years of writing and language. So Champollion looked at the Rosetta Stone. He could see the ancient Egyptian, you could see the ancient Greek, and you have the Demotic, which they knew was a Egyptian language that they actually spoke in Egypt. But we also know that Coptic came from Demotic, and Coptic was the last language that they spoke in Kemet, before the Arabs came and basically took Kemet away from the Romans. Coptic was the language that they used, and Coptic basically has borrowed words from Greek. It is also similar in its alphabet to the Greek alphabet. So, again, the thing is, we always talk about how they stole our language. Then, this goes back all the way to ancient Kemet, where we know for sure that one, Coptic is basically like a Christian language. Basically, it's made for Christianity, and they created it and forced it on the Egyptians to basically get rid of the Demotic language and to really instill Christianity in them. And we're going to see that a lot as we go through in this video, how Coptic was basically the language that came along and to try to basically hide Egyptian. Now, remember I said you have English was made for Christianity, Coptic as well, Arabic for the Quran, and Hebrew for Judaism, or what have you. These languages is created to cover up the true origins of the people and the religion itself. When you really get into it, it's there to cover it up. So understand, no matter what Champollion came up with, the problem is we are not going to know how the ancient Egyptian language actually sounds. How it sounds coming from them. So we can only speculate. We can only wonder, is it close? So no matter how much they worked on the Rosetta Stone, no matter how much we talk about it now, we're not going to know 100% for sure. Is what we are pronouncing and believing is the Egyptian language actually the language? Did it actually sound this way? Are we pronouncing words correctly? And this is one of the dilemmas that we find and that Champollion found when he was going through this whole decipherment. Champollion deciphered the name Ptolemy first. So he found two symbols in the name Ptolemy that matched the name of Thutmose and Ramses. So now we know that, again, we're not going to know exactly how the Egyptian names sound. We're not going to know that. But we do know that the Coptic comes from Demotic. So Coptic, they understand. So if he can basically find the word in Coptic that corresponds or fits with ancient Greek, which they also understand, and that's on the Rosetta Stone, then that will help them to decipher the rest of the Rosetta Stone. Now, again, understand they already believe that it all says the same thing anyway. It's just written in different languages. But there's an opportunity now, since you have all this stuff in different languages, to basically break down exactly what the Egyptian hieroglyphics is saying. So if they can find in Coptic something that matches in ancient Greek, and then they will get the decipherment for the Demonic and basically get the decipherment for the ancient Egyptian using these two symbols that he found in the name of Ptolemy, Thutmose, and Ramses. So let me explain a little bit more. Okay, so let me explain. These are basically the two symbols that Champollion seen, that he saw in the Ptolemy cartouche, and he saw in the name for Thutmose and Ramses as well. So it looks something like And forgive my hieroglyphic style. What you had. So, two symbols right here that he got the letters MS or the MIS sound or the Ms sound for Coptic. So you have this symbol, which is the two symbols, but you can also have, let me see, and if you can see that. And he got the MS sound from these glyphs. So we know in Coptic, he looked and seen that MS basically translate in Coptic as to give birth. This is why we put MS in front of the woman's name or MIS in front of the woman's name. And you get MS or MIS or MIS in Coptic. So we have MS or MIS means to give birth. And we have the word in English demise, which basically means, death. So he saw this in the Moses and Ramses, the demise or the mess or that sound. And he basically figured out that it's in Coptic. And he looked at it in ancient Greek, and he saw a group of words referring to birthday. So that gave him a connection that he had birthday, and he had a word, basically Egyptian word meaning to give birth. And he made a connection from the Coptic to the Demotic to the ancient Greek, and it helped him basically decipher the stone. Now, obviously, this wasn't the same for all of the hieroglyphics, but it helped him to decipher what Coptic couldn't. So now you also got to remember that a lot of people wrote about ancient Egypt. This is one of the reasons why we know, of course, a lot of the things to be true. Why I always rag on the Hebrews, because, so many people wrote about ancient Kemet. And you have, the same with almost every single civilization. People wrote about these civilizations because they went there, they explored. And when you go to a different civilization, you already know if you travel, when you go to like Aruba or Mexico, you know that this is totally different from where you come from. And it's something to talk about, and, we post pictures today. So back then, of course, they wrote about and they talked about the different civilizations that they visited. So Kemet, of course, was written about a lot. And they already knew about some of the names of the pharaohs. They already knew about some of the customs and things like that. People like Herodotus, of course, they had access to those writings, Champollion and them when they was doing this decipherment. So they had access to some stelas and some writings, and people already had like this basic understanding of some of the, let's just say the myths or what have you of ancient Kemet. So it helped him in his decipherment. Now, some of the stuff he used some of the stelas and some of the stuff that people provided, but a lot of things he just basically took back to Coptic since Coptic was working. So let me basically explain what he's seen. And you basically have, let's see. Forget my cartouche drawing, but you'll have this and so Champollion seen, okay, he looked at he said, you know what, this looks like a sun. And he said, in Coptic, we know the sun is Ra or Ray. So you have Ra, and he said, you know what, this thing looks like an M. And you have Ra, M-E-S-E-S, which is Ramses. So Ra, Ramses, where they got, or Rametsu, that's where they got it. And the thing is, when you see this, what you'll find out later is a lot of it is like abbreviation for the Greeks or the Romans. So sometimes when they did hieroglyphics, they didn't want to write the entire name because we know Ramses' real name is like way longer than that. You need like 2 cartouches to get his name. So this is what they did. So another thing, you have, or let me see. Okay, so another thing that Champollion seen, he remembered, as I said, they had writings from Herodotus and Diodorus or what have you to help them out in their decipherment. So you have the ibis right here. He's seen the ibis and he said, you know what, I remember Herodotus said that Thoth basically gave them the writing system and he was represented by an ibis. So when he seen the ibis, he had Thoth. And then you had Moses, M-S, M-E-S, or M-O-S. So when he seen this glyph, he put together Thoth, Moses. And that's how you got the Thutmoses name. Again, the whole thing is, you could say it's not the same translation or it's incorrect, but when you put it together, it actually fits with who they are talking about, which is Thutmoses. So it's a lot of different ways. When he went back and just simply used the Coptic, it was fitting with a lot of the things he was trying to decipher. So a lot of the cartouches and with a lot of the hieroglyphics, he just simply took it back to Coptic or took it back to things that made sense. And this is like really clear, easy. You got Thoth, Moses. And when you look at the hieroglyph for Thoth, sometimes you see it going sideways and it looks basically just like that. So it's just some of the things that he used. Now, again, obviously you can't do this with every single symbol, but it will help you to isolate some of the sounds, but it won't help you to basically decipher an entire wall of hieroglyphics. So that basically gives you like a little insight into what Champollion is talking about, and that it can't all possibly be true. You can't decipher all of those Egyptian texts using these methods or just simply going back to Coptic. There has to be another way that you use, another thing that you use to help you decipher all of these Egyptian hieroglyphics. I mean, even going back to the hieratic and cursive hieroglyphics into the New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, Old Kingdom, where they use different styles. And then you have to still differentiate from when the Romans was writing hieroglyphics and when the Greeks was writing hieroglyphics, in which case we see that if they didn't want to put Ramses' whole name up there, you see how they did it with the sun and, the way I showed you. And in these cases, a lot of times, what we call like abbreviations, a lot of the times the abbreviations was done by the Greeks and the Romans. And it just took people a long time to figure out that this was the Romans and Greeks writing in hieroglyphics and that they just abbreviated. So, with Champollion, you can't really go by everything he's talking about. What he really did was basically, kick in the door and leave it open for a lot of people to come in and correct some of his mistakes and basically help to really decipher the hieroglyphics. The problem is a lot of these people who came along later and was doing work, they are not recognized, they are not talked about. And then you have a lot of people like myself and many other scholars who basically did their own research because, listen, man, I'm going to tell you, if you get into this stuff, if you're really into it, and you're really into hieroglyphics and deciphering it and looking into the language, when you look at the excuse they give us from Champollion, it don't fit. It's just that simple. It's like, the stuff makes sense. The hieroglyphics, you see, well, wait a minute, what y'all saying fits. I mean, we can basically read this stuff, but the way they're telling us how they did it don't work. It don't fit. So they're leaving something out. And this is causing a huge problem for people who are now starting to come into this knowledge and starting to do the research. And it will lead you to believe or not believe in Champollion, but it will lead you to basically question the whole process of reading, writing, and understanding hieroglyphics. So now here's the thing that we are forgetting about. A lot of people forget that. Remember, we know that the Greeks lived in Kemet. We know that they worked with the Egyptians. We know that they lived with the Egyptians. And we have to remember that, one, the Egyptians did not adopt any outside customs. And Herodotus attests to that fact. that the Egyptians wouldn't learn any other languages or anything like that. So we can assume that the Greeks also knew Demotic, and this is how they communicated with the Egyptians. They had to communicate some way, somehow, unless there was another language spoken that we don't know about, or Demotic is just a lower form spoken only by just the commoners in Kemet. That could be possible as well, but we have to assume that the Greeks had to know this language, and this was the way they was communicating. Now, again, Herodotus is the one who gave it the name Demotic. The Egyptians actually called the language Shit-Shat, which basically means writing for documents. So again, we're not going to know exactly how the language sounded, but it doesn't mean that the Egyptian hieroglyphics or the Medu Neter was not deciphered. The simple fact that the Egyptians had a name for it gives us a clue that, this is either a lower form of writing or a lower form of communication developed probably just to communicate, to do business or what have you. And there was another language that was spoken. But again, it doesn't mean that the hieroglyphics wasn't figured out or that they didn't correspond, the Demotic, to fit with the actual hieroglyphics in order for it to be translated or deciphered. And this is something we're going to get into as we go along. So now, as I said in the beginning, I can understand why people are skeptical about the translation of the Medu Neter. As I said, when I first started studying this stuff, when I got into it, when I looked into the explanation for the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone and the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and I read about the whole story with Champollion, what I'm giving you right now, I said to myself, you know what, this is some bullshit. It's bullshit. Because it just didn't fit. It didn't seem right, especially when you start getting into the Coptic part, because Coptic would not decipher the entire Egyptian hieroglyphics as I'm explaining here. And they're not really going to give you too much more information into what else Champollion used. So, of course, it's really suspect. It's skeptical. And we know that, these people lie. This is what they are doing. This is why a lot of people in the Kemetic community don't want to really deal with European writings and stuff like that, because we know they lie and they damn sure not going to tell us the truth about something, especially if that truth is going to reveal African people to look smarter than what they have portrayed us. And this is basically the case in this whole thing with Champollion, as we're going to get into. But when you look at history, you still have to say to yourself, when you look at the history between the Greeks and the Egyptians, you have to say to yourself, of course, the Medu Neter was deciphered. Of course, the Greeks can read it, because, they would not have turned on the Egyptians. They wouldn't have set them up and turned on them if they couldn't read the glyphs. It don't make no sense. We know, again, Thales, we know Pythagoras, Plato, we know they studied in Kemet. I mean, look at all of the things that the Greeks and Romans was able to build, after conquest of Kemet. I mean, all of the structures, before Kemet fell, they didn't have none of these cities and everything like that. They didn't have the kind of architecture that they are known for when Egypt was in its heyday. We didn't see this kind of stuff until conquest. So, of course, Thales, Herodotus, Pythagoras, all these people who talk about, Greek and talk about Kemet, we know they went there, they studied. The knowledge and mathematics that they have is unbelievable. And they give openly the credit to Kemet and going there to study. So they would not have left, as I said before, all that gold, all them jewels, just the priceless artifacts that, they found later on in Kemet. They wouldn't have left all that stuff there if they didn't leave for something far more valuable that would basically have them set, forever. And they left with the knowledge and information that they used to build the empire that we still see in power today. So they had to, of course, decipher all this stuff and understand Rosetta Stone. I mean, understand the language and everything like that. They had to. So we know what happened after they got the information. After they basically didn't need Kemet no more, they decreed that the temples was devil worship and it was demon worship. Anybody who go in there and start studying any of the Kemetic writings or what have you, it was considered to be demonic text or the demonic text or devil worship. And, the Pope closed the temples down and basically they left Kemet to be buried, in the sand. So now understand, when they did find the Rosetta Stone, of course, the powers that be knew what it was. They knew how to translate it. They know how to read the demonic. They knew how to read the hieroglyphics. Now, if Champollion really wanted to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphics, where should he have gone? He should have went straight to Nubia, to the Sudan. There they got the Meroitic script. And the Meroitic script was basically created from the Egyptian hieroglyphics. It was created between 750 and 300 BCE. Now, it's basically, this is during the Napatan period. And Napatan is basically when Napatan was one of the capitals of Kush. So the Napatan is talked about by a lot of Greek scholars. Diodorus talks about it. Herodotus talks about it. So they knew all about it. So when it was basically using the writings from Herodotus, because when you start getting into what Champollion used to do this decipherment, as I said before, they went to some of the writings of Herodotus and Diodorus and a lot of the Greek scholars and, Plato and stuff like that to really try to get an understanding of the Egyptian text and what have you. So he should have went to Nubia because even then they knew about the Meroitic script. They knew all about it. And when you look here, we can see that they got the Meroitic Demotic script. They have the Meroitic hieroglyphics. This is not something that is new on the scene. They understood that a lot of the people fled from Kemet down into lower Africa, where all the war was going on. So they knew about these scripts and they knew it was a possibility that either the entire Egyptian language survived somewhere else or it at least evolved into different languages. Now, again, as I said, the powers that be can already decipher the hieroglyphics. They already knew how to read Medu Neter. Anybody who came along after that used African languages to decipher the Medu Neter. And this is what Champollion used. If Champollion wasn't an agent that was put in place to do this whole, press tidbit about the Rosetta Stone to just basically make them look smarter than what they are, then he used African text to decipher the Medu Neter, the Rosetta Stone, or what have you, because there's no way he could have just got the whole translation of all of the symbols and the Egyptian hieroglyphics using simply Coptic, which they try to lead you to believe. The problem is, of course, they don't want to give Kemet or give the African languages credit. Now, as I said, of course, the powers that be could read the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Anybody that tried to do a translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics had to use African text, African writing to do the translation. There's no way Champollion could have got this whole entire translation done by simply using Coptic. And that's the issue. They don't want to give the credit to the African languages because what you will find out is every single language that was used or derived from Egyptian hieroglyphics or a hieroglyphic style of writing was eventually replaced by Coptic. And this is why you see with the same thing with the Meroitic script, it was replaced by Coptic. And this is why what we see with Demotic, you have Coptic, and why you can use Coptic to basically go back and decipher Demotic, because they took a little piece of every language that they changed and kind of sort of put it into that group or that civilization style of Coptic. So you'll have a bunch of different civilizations that have Coptic, but depending on the language that it derived from or they took it from, some of the phonetic or phonemes or some of the little things about the dialect will be changed to fit that specific civilization. And this is what we find. So it's a lot of civilizations in Africa that basically had hieroglyphic styles of writing. So we look at Liberia, Cameroon, Nigeria, so many other places, Somalia as well, that basically had a hieroglyphic style of writing. And we see that most of these was basically changed or, taken over and replaced with Coptic.